Hello and welcome to Heilman and Haver, Seattle's #1 stage and screen podcast, coming to you from Casa de Quinn and 1111 Studios on the shores of beautiful Puget Sound. I'm Matt Haver.
And I'm Greg Heilman. We're two local actors looking to hone our craft by exploring the best of the Pacific Northwest theater scene and on the big screen. Since 2020, we've been bringing you entertainment news and views, celebrating classic Hollywood, mixing cocktails with a Tinseltown twist, interviewing talented local actors and directors, and chatting with industry experts from LA to Broadway to the UK.
Welcome to episode 73. This week we're pleased to welcome writer, lecturer, historian, researcher, and accomplished author Richard Barrios back to the show. We last spoke with Richard on episode 54 and 55 about classic movie musicals, what he calls, quote, a fabulous and fascinating, if sometimes peculiar, body of work, unquote.
That it is. Richard should know he's the author of must-see musicals, 50 show-stopping movies we can't forget, and West Side Story, The Jets, the Sharks, and the making of a classic for Turner Classic Movies. Screened Out, Playing Gay in Hollywood, From Edison to Stonewall, Dangerous Rhythm, Why Movie Musicals Matter, and A Song in the Dark, The Birth of the Musical Film, which was awarded the Theater Library Association Prize.
Richard has lectured extensively, co-hosted the Screened Out series on Turner Classic Movies, appeared in many film and television documentaries in the United States, Great Britain, and Japan, and served as audio commentator for numerous DVD and Blu-ray releases, including State Fair and South Pacific.
The publication date for his latest book from Oxford University Press is officially 4 days away, April 25th, but you can find it now everywhere fine books are sold and linked in our show notes. On Marilyn Monroe, an opinionated guide, looks beyond the ballyhoo and legend at Monroe's best-known films and some that even today remain obscure. Besides her films, it also addresses the work she did on television and the stage, as well as her underrated abilities as a vocalist. We're excited to learn more about all of it. Richard joins us now from his home in New Jersey. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Welcome.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here again.
Again, good to have you back.
Absolutely. So, as we prep for this show, I did a little cursory search online, one of my favorite sites, bookshop.org, and your book is there. Congratulations again. And I get 86 other results. So we think about the number of words that have been dedicated to Marilyn Monroe during her lifetime, and especially since her untimely death in '62. It's staggering to think about how many column inches have been devoted to her life. So tell us, why another book about Marilyn, and why now?
Well, first, 86 is an extremely low number because by some estimates, the total number of books, not articles, but actual books, is somewhere around 1,000, which is just, mind-boggling. It's also I attribute, I think, to the fascination that she held before her death, and even more, as we know, since, and she died 61 years ago almost, and the interest has never abated. Why I did this one is because that there are so many books that talk about her life, some a lot more factual than others, and speculate about, some of her personal associations and all that. And there are other books that use her as a subject for takes on feminism or, a lot of that kind of thing. I believe, people have their own agendas, and she's easy to project upon in that way. But with all of that, there have been very, very, very few works that have talked about her as a performing artist. And that, for her, was her treasured identity. She loved the fact that she had been working on her craft. She was never satisfied with it, but that was who she was, how she saw herself, and how she wanted the world to see her. And there have been almost no books. They refer to the movies, that sort of thing. But as far as really analyzing the performances, I can think of 2 other books that are devoted, as mine is, to the actual work and the legacy. And so I decided what it would be a good idea, since I had always loved Monroe. Why not do what you could call a biography of her through her work, not through, Joe DiMaggio or Happy Birthday, Mr. President, or what, any of that, but through the actual living proof that we have of what she did and how hard she worked at creating it.
Well, one of the things you address right off in your book is the many misconceptions about Marilyn Monroe as a woman actress, and just generally about her life. There's obviously no shortage of source material, as we just talked about, but myths, half truths, fabrications are all over the place. So I'm going to ask you two questions. The first is about your research process and if you uncovered anything specifically of interest that really surprised you or shocked you. And secondly, how about some tips on us digging through the garbage, so to speak, because there's so much out there, and to understand her as a person, a woman, we need to navigate that, and it's hard sometimes.
Well, the second question first, there are several worthy biographies of her where that are more sober, that don't dwell as much in the sensation, but really do try to get to the roots of who she was and how she lived, and also even how she died, as much as that can be ascertained. So yeah, you do have an awful lot of garbage that you have to shovel through. If I can just share the one that floored me when I was picking through stuff. And there may be a book about it, or several books even now, but I happened to run across it on a documentary that I ran across that seemed to start, as a sober examination of some of her life. But then it turned out that the whole point of this was going to be to investigate her connection with Area 51 and UFOs. And it was serious. It was almost like a bad parody, but it was dead, and they had these sober kind of appearing experts on that sort of thing. But it's good to know that that kind of junk is out there. It shows you how open her life is to all this kind of stuff. And that something like that makes me redouble my effort to focus on what we have, the legacy, which is so tangible and provable and indisputable. Now, as far as what I might have wanted, there are many sources, and a lot of them are sort of contradictory. So you really have to just keep digging and digging to find things out. And one of the good things about her is that basically at this point, anything that she touched or remotely came in contact with is reported and often reproduced on the internet. So I found some primary documents that were scanned, especially from early in her career when she had her first contract at 20th Century Fox. And there are actually memos that were found and were photographed and put online of from Ben Lyon, the director of talent at Fox, directing that she will now be known not as Norma Jean Doherty, but as Marilyn Monroe. And it puts the timeline in a little different position than it has been before. And if you've seen the book, you know that I opened with what I try to be very meticulous timeline of what she did, because there are still many, many misconceptions about all that. And I was able to find, I think, enough documentation to come up with what seems to me to be really accurate about that. And how, it becomes interesting when you see, like, sometimes the lag between when a movie was shot and when it was released, and what she may have done in that time span. So it gives you a good sense of how busy she was a lot of the time, which we don't always think about. But it also cuts to how hard she worked. She really strove to be a dedicated actor. And seeing, a lot of the timeline, which I was able to piece together from a lot of what was out there, really, really shows that. And it shows how serious she was about it, which people don't always realize. But that was what she wanted to be, and that was how she wanted to be seen.
Well, that's something I really enjoyed was, I mean, you're looking at her life through the lens of her work, and you stress that work ethic. And the timeline you spoke to is super helpful for someone like me who, just really kind of has a general consumer, American consumer background as far as Marilyn's concerned. Don't really know a lot about her, so that was a great way to start things off. It gave some great context, but you talk about that work ethic. Yeah, ever since she started, kind of fell into that first modeling career, during the Second World War. And that ethic, which was laudable, in some cases may have even led to some negative results, such as kind of falling in with some teachers and gurus that might have pushed her towards roles that they thought were suited for her. Maybe they weren't, as far as her skill and temperament. But either way, I mean, she threw herself into her roles, no matter what they were. I'm curious, what do you think was the kind of acting that she most enjoyed doing? And then maybe the flip side of that, where do you think she was the most gifted?
It's funny. I mentioned this in the book, in the movie, and it was one of the least favorite movies of hers. There's no business like show business. She sings an Irving Berlin song called After You Get What You Want, You Don't Want It. And a lot of that has ties in not only with her personal life, but also her professional life, because she worked very, very hard in the first, her career basically kind of splits down the middle, more or less. Her time in California and time in Hollywood, which ends after she makes The 7 Year Itch, which is a film she fought very hard to do. And then she decides that she needs something completely different. So she abandons Hollywood, which was shocking at the time, and goes to New York, studies with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio. Very, very serious intent. And she was never totally satisfied with any of her performances, especially later on, the ones that we think of that are so good: 7 Year Itch, Bus Stop, Some Like It Hot, The Prince and the Showgirl. And some of that is because so many of her teachers really were trying to move her, kept telling her that she was so gifted as a serious actress. And we never really totally got, I feel, the proof of that. She did several serious films, I think with mixed results, but she was so instinctively and by training good as a comic actor, but that was never thought by these mentor figures that was, you know that wasn't seen as being worthy. you know as they say, death is easy, comedy is hard. And she had this knack for comedy that was kind of unparalleled, but she never thought that was as good as being, and in all seriousness, talked about being Lady Macbeth or that sort of thing. And then the other part of the time in New York from then on was that Lee Strasberg, who was a great, great acting teacher, and later in his life became a great film actor as well. If you've ever seen Godfather Part Two, he's astounding in that. But they kept convincing her that Hollywood was not serving her, and she should be doing serious work. And then along with that, as part of the Actors Studio, a lot of the students of the Actors Studio were encouraged to go into analysis. And a number of people did feel with Monroe that her reliance from that point on intense psychoanalysis may have done more harm than good. And you can see in some of the performances that it really deepens her approach to her craft and acting. But when you read and see about the real problems she had just coping in life, it really stems more from that time. So it was certainly a sword that cut both ways, I believe.
You mentioned Some Like It Hot, and that kind of brings me to my next question. So the AFI ranked Some Like It Hot as the funniest movie ever made. Matt and I love it. It's one of our favorites that we talk about all the time. Jack Lemmon said about Marilyn Monroe that they liked each other, respected each other, got along great, but also said that by 1959 she was starting to grow afraid of the camera a little bit. So do you think this reclusion, I mean, this kind of ties into what you were just talking about, was a result of some of that environment that she was in with, the analysis, or do you think it was a push and pull from professional or personal disappointments?
I think a lot of it her was intrinsically her. She came from a very difficult background. Her family had a long history of mental issues. And a lot of the insecurity, which kind of lies in some of what Jack Lemmon says, she always had. I was reading about when she was doing, and much, much earlier, the movie Clash by Night, she did, where she has a supporting role and she's very good in it. She was so terrified of going on camera and working in this movie and kind of proving herself that before the camera would turn, she'd go throw up. And she was so nervous that she would break out in a rash and they weren't able to photograph her even in black and white in rash. And her one of the most famous aspects of her as a working performer was her lateness, which was legendary. And that all came from anxiety and the different aspects of anxiety and being afraid to face and not always feeling that she was able to give the camera what it wanted, not the director, the camera, what it wanted. And the thing was that unfortunately, you want to think that some people get a better grip on their problems if they undergo intense therapy. You want to think that. But in her case, it looks like it may have, in some ways, had the opposite effect.
Do you believe that maybe she had a touch of is that imposter syndrome, right? Where you feel that you're just not as good as you think you should be, or that you always have to keep trying to prove yourself.
I think that is completely part of it. And then connected with that was, she does, for example, the 7-Year Itch, and she's completely fantastic in it. She's wonderful in it, but she could not take any pleasure in that because right after she did it, she went to New York and she was around people who kept telling her she should be doing worthwhile things, i.e., serious things. And so you're having your achievements being diminished by people you respect. Forget movie critics who often, underrated her and underestimated her. But here are the people that she relies and respects. And they're telling her, you shouldn't be doing this. And then with the 7-Year Itch, when it opens and it's all about the pictures of her standing on the subway grate with the skirt flying up, and that's all seen as being demeaning. Well, I mean, surely it can be seen that way, but it also completely undercuts in her mind what she had achieved. And so how can one find really secure professional footing with all those different kind of things pulling on you?
Well, and also the instability of the studio system. That was something that it came out really with that timeline that you lead off with, back and forth and loaned out and back here, and maybe the contract's going to get renewed, maybe it's not, who knows for how long. I mean, that just would be very, very unsettling. And considering, you don't have to read too far into your book. I'm about halfway through and I'm really enjoying it. And our hard copies just arrived. This is going to go in a very respectable place on our bookshelf here. Really wonderful book, because you focus on that work, the blood, sweat, and tears that she poured out on the stage, on the sound set. And the bummer about that is, that public interest has always seemed to have centered on the tumultuous love life, the challenging personal life. And perhaps it's because there aren't enough, like you said, enough books out there that look through the lens of her as an artist. But it's almost to the complete exclusion of her actual body of work, save for those few evergreen films and these timeless images of her on the subway grate. Which I wonder if that would bring her pleasure, knowing now that this has become one of the most iconic images of pop culture history. But you focus on her skill set as a singer, as a dancer, as an artist, and you talk about those films that are lesser known. So can you give us a couple that we may not have seen, maybe our audience hasn't seen, and that we definitely should see?
Gosh, surely. Um,
How much time do we have? All of them. Watch them all.
all of them. No, 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 not all of them. There's a little kennel of dogs in there too. Um, but well, let's start by mentioning the obvious. Um, I regard Some Like It Hot as her best performance and best film. And the AFI was right. I mean, I put Duck Soup alongside it, but nevertheless, funniest film of all time. And that's good. One of the films that was closest to her, but she ended up being disappointed by it, is The Prince and the Showgirl with Laurence Olivier. And it is, as a film, disappointing. It's stodgy, it's talky, but boy, is she good in it. And it's not a Marilyn Monroe performance as we think of her. And you really see there the best results of the work she did with the study, with the actor's studio and all that. She's just really marvelous in it. Of course, it's also unnerving to read how difficult that performance was to capture for both her and for Olivier. And boy, did they not get along at all. And that's a massive understatement. A really lesser known one, and it wouldn't take you much time to get through it, is she had a very small role in a very small part of a movie. And it was a 5-part movie based on stories by O. Henry. And if you run it, it's the title of the movie is O. Henry's Full House. And if you run across it, you only have to watch the first 19 minutes because she's in the first segment of it. And she only has one short scene, but it's with one of the great actors of all time, Charles Lawton. And he thinks she's a nice girl when he goes to proposition her because he wants to get in jail for the winter. So he has a warm place. And he thinks that she's a nice girl. And so he tries to propose it. But then he finds out that she is a lady of the evening. And the layers the two of them go through. And her performance is just a little bit over 1 minute. But watch it and you see her go through so many levels. And she's wonderful. It's the kind of thing that you can show to someone and say, you think you know what Marilyn Monroe can do. Look at this. And you can do it in just over a minute. So it's really easy. The one I mentioned earlier that she did on loan to RKO, Clash by Night, that's probably the most, quote, normal character she ever played. And she's a healthy young woman who works at a fish cannery in Monterey, California. And she has a boyfriend. And again, it's taking her in a direction that we don't expect with her. And she really, really, really does it well. So those would be a couple I would recommend. And I love her first starring film, Niagara, because it's a film noir, but it's in color and it's incredibly garish, both in the color and what goes on, and especially with her. And she plays like one of the ultimate femme fatales in all of film noir. And boy, does she seize the opportunity. She takes no prisoners in that one at all. And it's an immensely entertaining movie. And again, it's one of those things with her, and it happened pretty often. The surface of her performances hot and glittering and sometimes lurid and sex, all those things that you can't really, it obscures what she's been doing underneath it. And she built her characters mainly from the inside out. So she thought about all these things and she constructs them, but she does it in a way that doesn't make it seem like, people, the critics just thought she would just show up and be, hot or sensational or whatever. And they didn't pay attention to the fact that she was building all these things and doing a much more assiduous job of that construction than most actors were in film at that time. In fact, almost all of them. So that would be my surface introduction to her work. And All About Eve, it's a classic, and she has a supporting role, but she's terrific in it.
Yeah, it just seems like we're in a society that likes to build people up just to knock them down, and it seems like she's just the personification of that. I mean, I don't know how many people you'd ask about Marilyn Monroe, and they'd even know that she spent time at the actor's studio or trained or did anything. They probably think she just showed up on screen, looked good, and that was it, because that's the
Yeah.
perception that people have.
Oh yeah. And the other thing is, when I got the assignment to do this book, and I would tell people I was working on a book on Marilyn Monroe, I don't know exactly what the percentage was, but it was more than 50. It would be more than half of the responses I would get would be, how do you think she died? That's the takeaway, you know, but it's because she's always in the larger public view, always been more about the sensation. And in some ways, there were times when she enjoyed the sensation she was causing. She certainly did when she entertained the troops in Korea, which she later would always refer to as the highlight of her life. But for the most part, when she was really trying to do serious things, and like I said in the book, you'd really try to do good work, and then you'd read a review that would focus mainly on your rear end. What does that do to someone who's really trying and being serious about it? And so, of course, with those kinds of things and the various circumstances around, her last days and the end of her life, they've also built her up to be a victim. And, that recent uh, Blonde, of course, even though it was a fictionalized take on her life, it really does propagate it because a lot of people see that and they think that's the way it really was. And that was a work of fiction. And I actually couldn't get through the whole thing because by that point I was so versed on the facts of her life that I was getting really annoyed by watching all this fictionalization and realizing that people were going to take it seriously.
Well, along those lines, and that actually brings me to my next question, along the lines of biopics. So there's been a number, but Blonde is just the latest, if you want to call it a biopic. As you said, it's largely a work of fiction, but people believe it to be true because, lack of critical thinking, whatever it is. But
A lot of that.
are there any biopics out there that accurately represent her life or her career?
Not much. The one that was interesting was, what was it, 12 years ago? My Week with Marilyn, that was the name of it, with Michelle Williams. And that was based on a really, just very narrow segment of her life. It was when she was in England shooting The Prince and the Showgirl. And that had, I think that Michelle Williams is a marvelous actress. I don't always feel that she captured Monroe totally, but you did get a feeling of a lot of the circumstances there much more than, there was a sheen of authenticity about it and candor that I appreciated. Way back in the early 1980s, I believe it was, there was a TV movie about Monroe's life. She was played by Catherine Hicks, who, did a lot of TV later on. And that really did have it was quite respectable. And there were people that had worked with her that worked on this, and that it didn't have an excessive amount of the sensationalism. And I appreciated that. But other than that, I mean, why they want to do it, but she is so, the most imitated person on the planet ends up being inimitable. So that's the thing. And they can't really capture her, but they're still going to always keep trying because the saga seems too irresistible for them to leave it alone.
Well, as with so many other stars and, beloved public figures that have passed away young, including one of her heroes, Jean Harlow, there's always that ongoing fascination. What might have been, what could have been. I remember growing up wondering how many other hit songs would Glenn Miller have made?
Sure.
Elvis, Hendrix, all these people, the 27 Club. And it's obviously conjecture. You do speak to what a lot of her goals were and the things that she took pride in, but how do you think she has most influenced modern filmmaking? And is there one thing that maybe you can put your finger on that you feel like she would be the most proud of looking back?
I think she would be very pleased that people still like to watch her films and really appreciate her performances, probably now more than they did when the films were new 68, 70 years ago. I think she would probably take an immense amount of satisfaction in that, even as she didn't always feel that the performances turned out as well as she wanted them to. She said during her life that the films that turned out the best were she thought The Asphalt Jungle, which again she has a small part in, but she's very good. She thought that was the one that turned out the way she wanted. A lot of the others she didn't, including apparently Some Like It Hot. Go figure. But I think she would take an immense amount of pride ultimately in the fact that people are probably now respecting her as a creative artist in ways that they did not when she was alive. And I think that would mean a lot. And in all modesty, if my book does a little something to keep that going, I'll be very happy because that was my intention with it to give her the respect I think she deserves.
Well, I was really pleased that all of us lovers of audiobooks are going to get a version of that. One more way for our listeners to consume this extremely well researched work. And it'll be narrated by someone we know. I want you to tell us a little bit about that experience as lovers of the spoken word, talking to expensive microphones here. What was that process like? We chat a little bit off air about it, but I think it's phenomenal that you're narrating the book yourself.
Well, thank you. And thank you for mentioning that. I had gotten word last fall when the book was being in the process of being produced and printed and all that. And there was actually, if I can be a little cognizant of the times, there was a slight delay with putting the book out because of supply chain issues involving paper. I never would have known that, but that's what I was told. But then I got word that it was going to be an audiobook. The company is Tantor Media, and they produce, I think, one of the largest groups of audiobooks. I go to their website. It's astounding the thousands and thousands of audiobooks they do. And that they were going to do mine, which was incredibly exciting. This is my sixth book, first one that's made it to this. And a couple of friends asked me, wow, do you know who's going to read it? And I said, no. And they said, you think you might want to read it? And I had not even thought of that till then. And then I asked people at my publisher, what did they think? And they passed it along to the company. And they said, sure, make an audition tape and we'll consider you. And I did, and they did, and I got word And I did use the argument that, in audiobooks, there is kind of a special cachet when a book is read by either a famous person or by its author. And I'm not a famous person, but I am an author. So, and I did it, actually last week, but I'm going back this week for retakes. It's an intense process. You're sitting in like a 4x5 cubicle with a table with a tablet on it on a little stand. That's what you read from, and you have the mic and the earphones, and you see the window, and you can kind of see the engineer out there, although the mic obscures most of his face because it's big, and it's very intense and very rewarding, and on the mouth and the lips and teeth also quite tiring, because by the end of the day you find that you're starting to slur words. And so I'm going to be interested in seeing what I have and hearing what I have to retake. But it was a different thing for me, and I wanted to try something different like that. And I feel very fortunate that it worked out.
Whole new career for you.
I doubt it. I'm one of the many zillions of people in the world who is not totally happy with the sound of my own voice as I hear it. But
we know how you feel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Talk about imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that too. But in this case, at least, I did kind of know what I was reading about, so that helps. And there were a few passages where I made some kind of snarky remarks that were indeed quite fun reading. So I was able to kind of take my my audio skills to that area at very least.
Well, you sound great. You sound great on our end of things. What's the production date or the release date for the audiobook?
I think it should be out sometime in May.
Oh, great.
They do these things very fast. Their technicians are really, really with it. So I think the turnover is generally pretty good. I'll know more when presumably when I go in for retakes, but I think they do them pretty fast. And I hope people maybe like the sound of my voice better than sometimes I do, but we'll have to see. I don't want to be like Marilyn Monroe, who once read a critical review of a performance she gave and started screaming. I'm hoping I won't be like that.
Before we let you go, what is next for you after the audiobook?
Funny you should ask. I'm actually in discussions with my editor, who's marvelous guy, Norman Hershey at Oxford University Press. And they have kind of Maryland has kind of relaunched a series that they had wanted to resume at Oxford called An Opinionated Guide. And there are several others that are in the pipeline now, or some of them are completed, I believe, about other famous artists. I know there's one on Elizabeth Taylor coming out and Audrey Hepburn. And I had a couple of ideas about doing it because I love working with Oxford and I love working with this editor. And writing this book was a challenge, but it was also a lot of fun. And so I'm not going to say yet who it is, but there is most likely another opinionated guide about a very famous movie performer who people are extremely familiar with, who I hope can give, as I tried to do with this one, somewhat of a different and respectful spin to. It's not Pauly Shore. So other than that, I'm not going to say, but I promise when it's all done, I'd be more than happy to come back and talk with you about it.
We'd love to have you back to talk about it.
Yeah, and we'll keep us updated, and we'll be the first to get the word out. We always enjoy having you on as a guest, and yeah, I got the book here in front of us on Marilyn Monroe, An Opinionated Guide from Oxford University Press, everywhere fine books are sold. Richard, thanks so much for spending some time with us, and congratulations on the new book and the audiobook forthcoming.
Thank you. Thank you. It is a pleasure always to speak to you, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you again to our guest, Richard Barrios. His new book, On Marilyn Monroe, an opinionated guide, is available now from Oxford University Press everywhere fine books are sold, and linked in our show notes. And while you're book shopping, search up his other titles as well. You'll enjoy them all.
And if you enjoyed episode 73, please make sure to follow us and share the podcast with a friend or two. You can find all the latest on heilmanandhaver.com, along with all of our past episodes, stage reviews, and popular segments like Get to Know a Theater, In the Mix, and behind-the-scenes artist interviews. As always, thank you for supporting your local theater and for joining us here on Heilman and Haver.